Hello everyone. Let's look at JWT, JSON Web Tokens with SurrealDB. Quite often I do tutorials or experiment with stuff and kind of you get the gist of it, but it's not actually production ready. So let's look at how we can secure our database using JWT. If you're not familiar with SurrealDB, it is the ultimate multi-model database. It supports, you see these logos here, so you've got Python, .NET, Java, Go, JavaScript, Rust. So there's SDKs for all of these languages. It's growing massively. Amazon, Nvidia, Samsung are using it. So it's worth investigating at least. So how to install? If you're on Mac OS, brew install, Linux, curl, Windows, IWR, whatever that is. You can install on Docker as well. So I've tried Docker and the curl, and they both work. Vouch for that. So SurrealDB docs. We'll be using the working from information gleaned from SurrealDB. You've also got Surrealist, which is an app where you can write your own queries and test out your queries. SurrealQL and SurrealML, we won't be delving into those. So these are all the SDKs, and you can see 9 different SDKs. The video here will be using code from this, Python, and also Rust, but don't hate me for using Rust because pip install SurrealDB. This is the official SurrealDB library for Python, released December 19th, 2023. So you'll need to install the database as just shown with the curl or the brew or whatever. Then do the pip install SurrealDB. Then we're going to move over to my code here. So I'm just going to clone this because it was a couple of days ago when I actually did it. And I'm just going to change to my Python directory. Let's just clone my repo. If we change into it, SJWT, just a font a bit bigger. Okay, and you can see I've got the framework of a Rust project here, which I used Rust to actually create the database, create the scope. From a Python point of view, we've got test underscore JWT. So the main.rs is the Rust code which will create the database. Right, let's before we go too far into that, I'm just going to show you the kind of the TLDR for this video. If you don't want to hear me talk through it and demo it, then you can skip ahead and go to redandgreen.co.uk, and the article is called Rust-Surreal-JWT. You'll find it on the redandgreen.co website. And this is Python code that will start off. So what it'll be doing is using the from SurrealDB import Surreal, and then we're going to use async as well, and async IO. And this will be using WebSockets and localhost 8000/RPC. And we'll be using DB Authenticate with a token, DB Sign-In, and DB Use. So the whole point of this is if your token is successful, your code will keep going. If your token's not successful, then your code won't, it will just quit here. It will quit when you try and sign in. Obviously, you need to handle that a bit more elegantly, but yeah. Right, so just to, I'll just demo the Rust code because that may or may not be of interest, but I'm just going to build it. My laptop is slow, I apologize for that. So this is kind of worst case. Hopefully you've got a faster computer and this will compile a lot quicker. So this is compiling, so it's actually building the binary, and this is in debug mode. So if you were to compile it for release with some of the optimizations, it would take even longer. But what I've started doing is creating a GitHub workflow and let it compile on there. Carry on. As long as you're not seeing any warnings from Rust Analyzer. So while that's running, let's actually look at what we're going to do with the Python code. So that's the Rust code. The first thing I did before actually starting to do all the Python code was just to do kill command. So connect to localhost 8000/SQL, select star from users test. The two things you need to do that I do up here somewhere is create a scope. And this is what caught me out because I jumped straight to the documentation for DB sign up, I think it is. Yes, DB sign up, DB sign in. So you need to use DB sign up. I just want to kind of show that even if you're not familiar with other languages, they've done such a good job on keeping most of the syntax the same or very similar. If you know one language, you can almost guess what it would be in the other language. JWT is just up here somewhere. Sign up. So it's .sign up. You need to create the scope, and the scope is what is essential for doing the token. The token is based on the scope. So if you want to learn more about JWT here, go to jwt.io. Depending on what you put in here, if you just change one thing, so see how it changes? Every single character. So if I go from DOE to DOF, see how that changes completely? So it's using the SHA-256, HMAC SHA-256. So you could actually create a token in here if you use the same values. So namespace is test, database test, scope is admin, params, credentials. I couldn't actually find a worked example of this anywhere. I had to go on Stack Overflow and use the SurrealDB documentation to really. This was in the SurrealDB documentation, but it wasn't explicit that you had to do this first. Maybe that's just me being a bit naive with SurrealDB, but let's drag that across a bit. So scope created successfully there. You can see when the create scope, getting the scope from here. And sorry, yeah, to create scope, I had a function. Sorry, it's a bit upside down. I had a function further down which actually creates a scope. Right, enough of that. Let's come back here and nearly compiled there. Once it's compiled, it creates first time or whenever you run the binary executable, it'll create your token. I can't remember how long the token's valid for. I think, don't quote me on this, but I think it's 2 hours. Maybe. So once we've got the token, I altered the code actually. So the code will put the token, how long it is. The code will put the token in a text file. And then once it's done that, it failed. Right, this is why it's better just to do. This is why it's better to do a tutorial or do a demo rather than just kind of scroll through some notes. Where were we? Right. So on my GitHub repo, got the notes and got the code to start. There's different ways of starting the database, and obviously you can have with the banner, you can have with authentication, and deny guests, no banner. So I'm going to run it like this. If I do that, I'm just going to open another tab. you see it started, and we didn't get the banner because I just turned it off, but authentication is enabled. So now when I run the code, and it won't, although it, there we go. Scope created successfully. So what it did was it created the scope based on. I know I keep talking about the scope, but if you don't get about the scope, then none of this will work. So define scope, and it's just a query. So although I'm showing you the Rust version, this query actually would be the same in whatever, because this is SurrealDB. So you're creating a hash of the password. Select star from user where email. With Surreal, if the table doesn't exist, it will create it for you. Right, so I'm just going to do Mr. Moo at mrmoo.com. Password. And that's just some query response there. You don't need to worry about that. It's just kind of see it's successful though. So token has been written to token.txt. Obviously, you wouldn't do this in real life, well, in production, but this is kind of halfway between tutorial and production. This is showing how to set up authentication with JSON Web Token. Right, so we've got that. Now I can copy that, and we'll go to the. So my phone's ringing. Just bear with. Right, sorry about that. Okay, so we've got the token, or we've got the text from the token, and let's now look at the Python code, which was the test JWT. NV is just my shortcut to nearvim, by the way. Don't worry about that. You could do this in VS Code, no problem. Right, so I'm going to paste in that new token. Let's just run the code, and then we'll go back and actually look at it. Here we go. So that worked, and the reason it attempting to authenticate, authentication successful, and then we've done some queries. So let's look at the code, and let's go full screen just for that. If anybody's watching this on a mobile phone, and I know some people do, so yeah, I try and keep the font size nice and big. So from SurrealDB import import async IO. Whatever you do, don't import. Don't do pip install Surreal. Surreal is something else. Obviously, they used that name first. So when you do pip install, make sure you do pip install SurrealDB. Async was asynchronous, so you do async before your function name. Async with Surreal. So because it's network bound rather than IO bound, you want to be using async. Attempting to authenticate, which is what you just saw. Authenticate with the token, and the token is what I just pasted in there. That was the token that you saw me generate. Authentication successful. Once this authenticated, obviously the rest of the code will it will still carry on, or it will still run. If that hadn't have been successful, the code just would have stopped. Wouldn't have got down to this line. So now we're on this line, we can do the sign in. This is just root and root. You can obviously customize. I've not really got into the advanced or the more in-depth user and passwords. That's kind of a DB admin task, which I'm more interested in the authentication at the moment. Await DBU. So you've got a namespace and a database name here. For instance, if you're more familiar with Postgres or something like that, you probably won't be familiar with using namespaces. But anyway, await DB create. So if the database doesn't exist, it's creating a database called character and name base. And so hopefully that's again with SurrealDB, if a table doesn't exist, it creates it. And also you have a thing called a thing, and a thing is it's like a combination of the table name and the actual ID of the thing. You can have an auto-generated ID, or you can actually use what you're entering as part of the ID. So another create, so we create 3 characters. DB select, DB query, DB query. So it's always DB query. We're doing a query, obviously. And then down at the end, I did the delete. You can see what happened in the logs here. So, wow, there's a lot down there, isn't there? Let's go right to the end. Yeah, there you can see the delete. Before the delete, you would expect to see there was some selects. Yeah, there was a select. So if you're having any problems, you can come into the command line and you can check what's going on. I cancel that. Start again. Surreal. Actually worked with the backticks as well, didn't it? Start it up again. So it's running on port 8000. If you've got anything else running on port 8000, say for instance you're doing stuff with Flask, then obviously you'll need to you need to change the port, the default port. So this was an overview and kind of a demo of using JSON Web Tokens with SurrealDB with Python code. And the main thing really is just to make sure you can establish a connection to your database. Remember the scope. The scope is the important bit here that caught me out and might catch you out. So you need to do the scope. Scope's not something that I was very familiar with. And the token, again, so if I change one thing in the token, I'll just show you what, if I change that W to an X, let's run it again, and it's failed. Attempting to authenticate, and obviously I've not handled that failure very gracefully, but you can see what the problem is. Authenticate. It says there's a problem with the database, but that's further down. That's as a result of attempting to authenticate not working. So there we go. Hopefully this has given you an insight in how to authenticate your database using JSON Web Tokens, and just a little bit of insight in how to very easily get the SurrealDB database up and running. And if you're interested in Rust, this article's here, and it shows you how to, you've got the cargo, you've got SurrealDB, SurrealDB. That's for the SDK, for the Rust SDK. Tokyo, which is the async part of the code. And the scope. Just remember the scope. It's all about the scope. So thanks for watching. Be back soon.